The first thing that hits you isn't the salty spray of the ocean or the feeling of freedom. It's the smell. You're in a small rowboat, bobbing on the waves, being ferried out to your new home. From a distance, the ship looks almost picturesque against the setting sun, a dark silhouette with tangled rigging. But as you get closer, the wind shifts. The air, which a moment ago was clean and briny, suddenly becomes thick, heavy, and foul. It's a physical presence, a wall of odor that makes your eyes water and the back of your throat clench. You try to breathe through your mouth, but that's a mistake. The taste is somehow worse. You reach the side of the ship, and a rope ladder is thrown down. The rope is stiff and greasy to the touch, and as you begin your clumsy ascent, your hands get coated in a film of grime. With every upward pull, the stench intensifies. You are climbing directly into the source of it. Finally, you heave yourself over the railing and land with a thud on the wooden deck. You stand there for a moment, catching your breath, trying to make sense of the sensory assault. The air is a complex, layered cocktail of foulness. The most dominant note is a deep, permeating musk of unwashed humanity. It's the smell of dozens of men living in close quarters, sweating under a relentless sun, their bodies and clothes saturated with weeks, maybe months, of accumulated filth. Beneath that is the sharp, acrid tang of rot. It's the smell of food going bad, of damp wood slowly decaying, and something else, something vaguely metallic and unpleasant that you can't quite place. Then there's the animal smell. You see a small pen near the stern holding a few scrawny chickens, their waste mingling with the rest of the grime on the deck, the constant background smell. You realize, this is a mainstream historical fact that we often forget in our romanticized versions of these ships. Every wooden vessel of the era was held together and waterproofed with pint iron pitch. It was slathered over the hull, worked into the ropes, and used to seal every seam. This pungent, slightly chemical smell was unavoidable. It coated everything and got into your clothes, your hair, and the very air you breathe. It was the scent of preservation, a necessary evil to keep the sea out, but it mixed with all the other odors to create a truly unique and suffocating perfume. As you stand there, trying not to gag, you notice the deck beneath your feet is slick and uneven. It isn't just seawater. It's a grimy slush of spilled rum, rainwater, bits of discarded food, and who knows what else. Your gaze drifts downwards, towards the gaps in the planking. From the darkness below, another smell wafts up, the ghastly breath of the bilge. This is one of those wonderfully disgusting, lesser-known details of life at sea. The bilge was the lowest part of the ship's hull, a dark, inaccessible space where all the foul liquids inevitably collected. Leaked seawater, runoff from the decks, vomit from seasick sailors, waste from the animal pens, spilled food and drink. It all trickled down and sloshed around in a stagnant, toxic soup. Cleaning the bilge was a horrific and sometimes deadly job, but leaving it alone meant the entire ship would be poisoned by its fumes. The smell rising from below is the smell of pure, concentrated filth. You're beginning to realize that on this ship, there is no such thing as clean. There is only less dirty. The concept of hygiene as you know it simply doesn't exist here. Historians still debate the full psychological impact of this constant sensory overload. Did living in a perpetual state of foulness contribute to the pirates' famously aggressive and volatile nature? Or did they, by necessity, simply become desensitized to a level of filth that would overwhelm a modern person? As you ponder this, your eyes adjust to the dim light, and you start to make out the shapes of your new crewmates. They are watching you, and the sight of them is no more comforting than the smell. They detach themselves from the shadows of the rigging and the low doorways of the cabins. They are not the boisterous, laughing rogues from storybooks. They are quiet, upraising, and their stillness is more unnerving than any loud threat. Your eyes, now more accustomed to the gloom, start to pick out details. The man closest to you, leaning against the mainmast, is older than you first thought. His face is a roadmap of a hard life, a canvas of sun-baked leather etched with deep lines around his eyes and mouth. A low, faded scar cuts a pale path from his temple down to his jaw, disappearing into a ragged, patchy beard. He offers you a slow, deliberate grin, and you have to fight the urge to recoil. His mouth is a ruin. You see a few yellowed, crooked teeth, but mostly it's a collection of blackened stumps and empty, pink gums. The smell of his breath, sour and foul even from several feet away, adds another layer to the ship's oppressive atmosphere. This, you will learn, is the North. Proper dental care was not existent, and a pirate's diet was a disaster for their teeth. Scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency, would loosen teeth in their sockets until they could be plucked out with fingers. The enormous amounts of sugar in their grog and drum also led to rapid decay. As you look around at the other faces watching you, you see variations of the same dental catastrophe everywhere. A healthy smile on this ship would be as out of place as a soaked pillow. It's a mainstream historical point we often overlook. These charismatic adventurers of our imagination would have had breath that could wilt flowers and smiles that would curdle milk. You tear your gaze away from their mouths and notice their hair. It's not just long and unkempt, as you might expect. It's managed in a horrificatingly practical way. Many of the men have their hair tied back and stiff, greasy ponytails. But it's not just dirty. You realize it's deliberately coated in something. It's matted and stiff, almost sculpted into shape. This is a bizarre and little-known piece of pirate hygiene. Some men coated their long, tangled locks in tar or animal grease. This wasn't a fashion statement. It was a desperate form of pest control. The thick, sticky substance made it harder for lice and other insects to take up residence in their hair. It also helped to keep the hair out of their eyes and from getting tangled in the ship's rigging while they worked. The side effect was that their hair became a stiff, foul-smelling helmet of congealed grime. Their clothes are no better. They are a patchwork of faded colors and mismatched fabrics, stiff with salt and sweat. Every garment is stained, patched, and frayed at the edges. You see bare feet. The soles is tough and cracked as old leather. You see hands with broken, blackened fingernails, and more than a few missing fingers. Grim souvenirs from accidents with ropes or weapons. These are not costumes. They are the clothes of men who wear them until they literally rot off their bodies. They are all watching you, their eyes, some clear, some bloodshot, assessing your value. Are you strong? Can you fight? Can you work the sails in a storm? Or are you just another mouth to feed? Another liability. There's no welcome in their expressions, only a wary, predatory curiosity. This quiet, tense assessment shatters another myth. The idea of a pirate crew as a band of merry brothers, united in their rebellious freedom, is a comforting fantasy. The reality, as historians are still trying to piece together, was far more complicated. It's a subject of ongoing academic debate. What truly drove these men to piracy? Were they all roaring rebels? Ideologues who chose a life of liberty over the tyranny of the Royal Navy or the crushing monotony of merchant life? Or were many of them simply desperate men, cornered by poverty, unemployment, or the threat of being pressed into naval service against their will? For many, piracy was the choice for freedom, but the only choice other than starvation. This question hangs in the air as you look at them. Are you looking at a crew of ideologues, or a floating collection of the world's most desperate and dangerous outcasts? The man with the ruined smile pushes himself off the mast. He takes a slow step towards you, his bare feet making a soft, sticky sound on the grimy deck. He stops a few feet away, close enough now that his personal odor, a pungent mix of stale sweat, rum, and something vaguely like old cheese, is distinct from the general stench of the ship. He looks you up and down one last time, his gaze lingering on your soft, clean hands. He doesn't say welcome aboard. He doesn't introduce himself. He simply gestures with a grime-caked hand towards a dark hatchway in the center of the deck, a black square leading down into the ship's belly. Best find your sling, he rasps, his voice a low, gravelly sound, like stones being ground together. Captain wants to sail with the morning tide. That's it. Your introduction is over. Now you have to descend into the darkness where the rest of the crew lies. The man gestures again, more impatiently this time, and you know you can't stall any longer. You move towards the open hatch, the stench from below rising to meet you. It's the concentrated essence of the ship's smells, the damp rot, the unwashed bodies, the bilge fumes, all trapped and intensified in an enclosed space. Holding your breath, you grip the edges of the hatch and begin to climb down the steep, narrow ladder into the darkness. The air immediately becomes thicker, hotter, and more humid. You can feel the moisture on your skin, a greasy, foul condensation. Your feet hit the lower deck, and you pause, allowing your eyes to adjust to the oppressive gloom. The only light comes from a single, sputtering lantern, swinging gently with the motion of the ship. Its weak, yellow glow casts long, dancing shadows, making the space feel alive and threatening. This is a berthing deck, the place where the entire crew, aside from the captain and perhaps a few officers, eats, sleeps, and exists. Your first impression is of claustrophobic clutter. The ceiling is so low that you have to stoop to avoid hitting your head on the massive wooden beams that support the deck above. The space is a chaotic jumble of sea chests, barrels, coils of rope, and discarded equipment, and hanging in every available space, crammed side by side in rows, are the hammocks. This is your new home. There are no cabins, no private bunks, no personal space whatsoever. You will sleep here, suspended in a canvas sling, literally shoulder to shoulder with dozens of other men. As your eyes adjust, you see them, lumps of humanity cocooned in their hammocks, some already asleep, their snores and wheezes adding another layer to the cacophony of sounds. The air is a symphony of human noise, turfing, muttering, the soft groan of a man shifting in his sleep, and the unsettling sound of scratching. Everyone, it seems, is scratching. The hammocks themselves, a well-known feature of seafaring life, were actually a huge improvement over sleeping on the damp, hard deck. They kept sailors off the wet, rat-infested floorboards and provided some measure of comfort against the ship's constant rolling. It's one of the few genuinely good ideas you'll encounter here. However, the sheer density of bodies turns this practical solution into a sanitary nightmare. You see a vacant spot between occupied hammocks and realize that's your designated space. You will sleep, breathe, and sweat less than an arm's length from your neighbors on either side. Their coughs will be in your ear. Their smell will be in your nostrils. You are not just joining a crew. You are being absorbed into a single, collective organism. The very idea of privacy evaporates in this space. Every conversation will be overheard. Every restless night will be observed. As you stand there, a strange, lesser-known detail catches your eye. Tucked into the corners and along the edges of the deck are small, makeshift curtains, often made from scraps of sailcloth or old blankets. You might initially think these are for privacy, but their purpose is much more grimly practical. These are sick bays. When a man became ill with something contagious, like dysentery or fever, he might be moved behind one of these flimsy barriers. It wasn't an act of compassion so much as a feeble attempt at quarantine, a way to keep the sick man's misery slightly separated from the main population. But in this enclosed, poorly ventilated space, it was a gesture of futility. The germs, like the smells and sounds, cowled and be contained by a thin piece of cloth. The air itself feels solid, a mixture of carbon dioxide from dozens of breathing lungs, smoke from the lantern, and the ever-present miasma of filth. You notice there are no portholes. The only ventilation comes from the hatch. You just descended in perhaps a few small grates that you can't see in the darkness. On a calm, hot night, this space would become an oven, thick with suffocating, recycled air. During a storm, when the hatches would be battened down, it would be a living too. The psychological toll of living like this is a topic that still sparks discussion among maritime historians. How did a complete and total lack of privacy affect the social dynamics of a pirate crew? Some argue it fostered a powerful, if dysfunctional, sense of brotherhood and interdependence. Others contend it created a powder keg of tension, where small annoyances and personal conflicts could easily escalate into violence because there was simply no escape. There was no going to your room to cool off. Your room was every owner's room. You finally spot a UNS Lunghammer, a roll of dirty canvas lying on top of a sea chest. That must be yours. You pick it up. It feels stiff and slightly damp, and it smells faintly of its previous owner. As you begin the awkward process of trying to string it up between the hooks, you are acutely aware of the eyes on you. Not all the men are asleep. Some are watching you from their own hammocks, silent and unmoving in the flickering light. They are judging your competence, your every clumsy move. You fumble with the ropes, your clean hands struggling with the stiff, turned knots. A low chuckle comes from a nearby hammock. You are the new animal in the zoo, and your initiation has just begun. Tonight, you will try to sleep here, surrounded by the sights, sounds, and smells of your new life, wondering if you will ever feel clean or be alone again. Just as you finally manage to secure one end of your hammock, a figure emerges from the gloom and claps a heavy hand on your shoulder. You flinch, startled. It's the man from the upper deck, the one with the ruined smile. You didn't even hear him come down the ladder. He leans in close, his foul breath washing over you again. Forget that for now, he rasps, his voice low and conspiratorial. You need the tour. Don't want you mac in a mess where you shouldn't. He gives a short, barking laugh that ends in a wet cough. That's not asking. H.E.S. telling. This is your new employee orientation. Pirate style. He gestures for you to follow him, and you abandon your hammock, scrambling to keep up as he navigates the cluttered space with practiced ease. He doesn't carry all lantern. He seems to be able to see perfectly in the near total darkness. He leads you back up the ladder to the main deck, where the night air, as foul as it is, feels almost fresh by comparison. Pay attention, he grunts, pointing a stubby finger towards the ship's massive wheel at the stern. That's the quarterdeck, captain's place. You don't go there unless you're told. You don't speak to him unless he speaks to you. Simple. This is standard ship hierarchy, a rule as old as sailing itself. The quarterdeck was the ship's nerve center and a space reserved for officers. On a pirate ship, which prided itself on its democracy, this rule was often more relaxed, but a wise newcomer wouldn't test its boundaries. He then leads you towards the bow, the front of the ship. His bare feet make slapping sounds on the grimy planks. Jolly, he says, pointing to a small, smoky hut built onto the deck. It's little more than a brick firebox shielded from the wind. This is where all the crew's food would be prepared. Cook's sticking there. Don't steal his rum. HES got more knives than you've got fingers. It's a piece of practical advice wrapped in a thread. The ship's cook, often an older pirate with a disability, like the famous Long John Silver with his missing leg, held a position of surprising power. He controlled the rations and the grog, making him a man you wanted as a friend. Your guide continues his tour, pointing out the mast, the rigging, the capstan used for weighing anchor. It's all a blur of nautical terms you don't understand, but then he stops. He points directly at the very tip of the bow, to the beakhead, the part of the ship that juts out over the water, right beneath the long bowsprit. He grins that awful grin again, a true display of dental devastation. Him there, he says, his voice dropping with mock solemnity. Here's the head. You stare. Confused, you see a wooden grate, and below it, some netting stretched between the timbers. It's completely exposed to the wind and the waves. You don't understand. Duh. Head, you ask, your voice barely a whisper. The shitter, Boyle, he says with a wheezing chuckle. The crapper, the throne room, whatever you want to call it. He explains, with far too much relish, that this is the one and only toilet for the entire crew. To relieve yourself, you had to climb out onto this precarious great hornet, squat over the open ocean, and hope for the best. There was no door, no walls, no privacy. You were in full view of anyone else on the bow. In a rough sea, waves would crash over the bow, drenching whoever was unfortunate enough to be using the facility at that moment. The term head for a toilet is a fashionably direct piece of nautical history. It originated from this very practice. You had to go to the head of the ship. It's a mainstream term whose disgusting origins are often forgotten. As you stare in horror at the flimsy-looking structure, your guide shares a lesser-known, and frankly terrifying, detail. Rule number 1 of the head, he says, holding up a grimy finger. Always keep one hand for yourself and one for the ship. Seen more than one clumsy fool get washed right off while tacking a squat. Sharks? Gotta eat too. He laughs again. The thought of being in such a vulnerable position, clinging on for dear life while a rogue wave tries to sweep you into the ocean, is sickening. This toilet situation was perhaps the single greatest source of filth and disease on the ship, second only to the food and water. The area was perpetually fouled, and the waste would often wash back onto the ship itself, contaminating ropes and timber. The lack of sanitation was appalling even by the standards of the time. But where did this design come from? Historians are still piecing together the evolution of shipboard sanitation, but the prevailing theory is that it was a choice of pure, grim pragmatism. It was the easiest way to get waste off the ship with minimal construction and minimal interior space. The health and comfort of the crew were a distant second to the efficiency of the vessel. The debate continues on just how much this constant, humiliating, and unsanitary act contributed to the spread of diseases like dysentery. Was it the primary vector, or was it just one of many contributing factors in a floating petri dish? Your guide seems to sense your revulsion. He claps you on the back again. A horrid, jarring impact. You'll get used to it, he says, though his tone suggests he doesn't really believe it. Or you won't. Ship doesn't care either way. He turns and starts shuffling back towards the main hatch, leaving you alone at the bow. You are left staring at the head, the wind whistling through the rigging around you. The tour is over. You now know the basic layout of your prison, from the captain's sacred quarterdeck to the crew's disgusting communal toilet. And with that knowledge comes a sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. This isn't an adventure. It's a test of survival, and you haven't even made it through your first night. You turn away from the ghastly sight of the head and slowly make your way back towards the dark maw of the berthing deckhat. The brief tour has left you with a profound sense of dread. It's not just the physical discomfort. It's the dawning realization of the ship's internal logic. Every aspect of life here seems governed by a brutal, unforgiving pragmatism where human dignity is the first and most frequent casualty. As you descend the ladder back into the suffocating ward below, you begin to understand the unspoken rules that dictate survival in this floating society. You find your hammock again and resume the clumsy task of stringing it up. This time, no one laughs. Your brief orientation with the old pirate has somehow legitimized you. Just a little. You are no longer completely fresh meat. You are now meat that has been informed of its impending doom. As you work, you watch the men around you. Some are mending clothes with thick, clumsy needles. Others are sharpening knives on whetstones, the rhythmic scraping sound filling the air. A small group in the corner is gambling with dice made from bone, their voices low and intense. There is no idle chatter. Every activity is focused, economical. You start to notice the little things. The subtle hygiene hacks of men who have long since abandoned any hope of being clean. You see a man take a swig of rum, but he doesn't swallow it all. He swishes it around his mouth vigorously for a moment before spitting a brown stream into a bucket. This was a common practice. Rum, with its high alcohol content, was used as a makeshift mouthwash, a way to kill some of the germs and temporarily dull the pain of a rotting tooth. It's a classic historical fact that alcohol was a multi-purpose tool at sea, serving as morale booster, currency, and crude antiseptic. Another man is tending to a cut on his arm. He has no bandages. Instead, he is carefully rubbing a mixture of Stockholm tar and what looks like spitterbears into the wound. This is a fascinating, undisgusting piece of folk medicine. Stockholm tar, the same stuff used to waterproof the ship, was a common cure-all. It was believed to have antiseptic properties, and its sticky nature helped to seal wounds from the filthy air. The spitterbears were used to help the blood clot. It's a cringe-inducing sight, but on a ship with no real doctor, you used what you had. Historians are still debating the efficacy of these folk remedies. Did the tar actually prevent infection due to its phenolic compounds, or did it simply seal in bacteria, making a bad situation worse? The evidence is anecdotal and grim, but for these men, it was better than doing nothing. This leads you to the unspoken rule of the ship. Waste nothing. Absolutely nothing. Fresh water was the most precious commodity, far more valuable than gold or even rum. It was strictly rationed, This meant there was no water for washing hands, no water for bathing, and certainly no water for doing laundry. To use fresh water for anything other than drinking was a serious offense, punishable by a flogging or being put on even shorter rations. This is why the men were so filthy. It was just laziness or a lack of concern. It was a matter of survival. The ship could sail for weeks or months between opportunities to find fresh water. Wasting it was a threat to everyone on board. This obsessive conservation extended to everything. Old clothes were thrown away. They were cut up into patches to mend other clothes, or unraveled to provide thread, or used as cleaning rags until they disintegrated. A broken tool would be reforged. Even discarded food scraps had a purpose, often being thrown into the perpetuals to pot or given to the ship's animals. You watch a man finish eating a biscuit, carefully collecting the crumbs in his palm and tipping them back into his mouth. Every calorie counted. This culture of extreme thriftiness is a little-known aspect of the pirate lifestyle. We imagine them as wasteful hedonists, constantly drinking and feasting. While they certainly indulged when they could, life at sea was defined by scarcity. This scarcity bred a unique mindset where the line between dirty and resourceful was completely blurred. A shirt isn't filthy. It's well worn. A pot isn't unwashed. It's seasoned. The grime on your skin isn't ungiven. It's a protective layer. You begin to see your own clean clothes and soft skin not as a sign of health, but as a mark of your inexperience. You are walking, talking waste of potential resources. Your sweat hasn't yet stained your shirt. Your hands haven't yet been calloused by the ropes. You haven't yet learned to stop caring. You finally get your hammock hung. It sags ominously, but it seems to hold. As you cautiously climb in, the canvas cocooning you, you feel the gentle but constant motion of the ship. It's a rocking, swaying rhythm that you know you will have to get used to. You lie there, fully clothed, breathing the thick, recycled air. You are surrounded by the smells, the sounds, and the silent, unspoken rules of this place. The most important rule of all is now chillingly clear. The ship comes first. The crew, as a whole, comes second. You, as an individual, are utterly, completely expendable. And with that comforting thought, you close your eyes and try to find sleep in the heart of the filth. Morning does not arrive with a gentle dawn. It comes as a sudden, violent intrusion. A booming voice from the top of the ladder yells, all hands on deck, followed by the shrill, piercing sound of a boatswain nest pipe. The effect in the cramped berthing deck is instantaneous and jarring. Men groan, curse, and begin to untangle themselves from their hammocks with a practiced speed that you like. The air is immediately filled with the sounds of coughing, spitting, and the rustle of dirty canvas. Within moments, the space is a flurry of activity, and you are nearly trampled as you struggle to get out of your own sling. There is no time for waking up slowly. Your workday has begun. On deck, the rising sun is a pale, hazy disk on the horizon. The air is cooler, but the smells are still there, waiting for you like old friends. The first order of business is not breakfast. It is the distribution of the daily water ration. The quartermaster, a stern-looking man with a ledger and an iron key, unlocks a large cask. A line forms, and you join it, holding the tin cup you were given last night. As you get closer, you see him dip a ladle into the barrel and pour carefully measured amount into each man's cup. This is it. This is your water for the day. You are expected to make it last for drinking, and nothing else. When it's your turn, he fills your cup. You look down at the liquid. It is not clear. It's a pale, yellowish brown, with a faint green tinge around the edges. You can see small, dark specks floating in it, and a thin, slimy film on the surface. You hesitate. The man behind you gives you a sharp nudge. Drink up or move on. He growls. You take a tentative sip. The taste is as bad as it looks. It's stale, with a strong, woody flavor from the barrel, and an underlying taste of Algérie rot. It's thick in your mouth, almost viscous. This is the reality of water at sea, a mainstream historical fact that is hard to truly appreciate. Fresh water, stored for weeks or months in wooden casks, did not stay fresh. Bacteria and algae would grow, turning the water stagnant and foul. The barrels themselves would leach tannins into the water, adding to the color and taste. To make this putrid water more palatable, sailors, including pirates, developed a famous solution, grog. This was just about having a party. Admiral Edward Vernon of the British Navy is famously credited with its invention in 1740. He ordered that the sailors' daily rum ration be diluted with water. This had two benefits. It helped to mask the foul taste of the water, and it prevented the sailors from getting too drunk too quickly by saving up their potent rum ration. Pirates, who were not bound by naval discipline, often mixed their own versions, sometimes adding lime juice, if they had it, or sugar to further improve the taste. This is why grog was so central to life at sea. It was a way to hydrate using water that was otherwise nearly undrinkable. But there's a lesser known and more disgusting element to the ship's water supply. What about the worms? You look closer at your cup and see that some of the dark specks are not specks. They are moving, tiny, wriggling larvae are swimming in your daily ration. These were often mosquito larvae or other waterborne creatures that had hatched in the stagnant casks. Sailors had a grimly practical way of dealing with this. They would often strain the water through a piece of cloth to filter out the worst of the livestock. Or, in the dark, they would simply hold their teeth together as they drank, using them as a makeshift filter. The saying "a seaman's life" is a hard one takes on a whole new meaning when you imagine having to physically block worms with your teeth to get a drink. The question of why they didn't just boil the water is one that still generates some debate among historians. While the concept of boiling water to purify it was known in some cultures, it was common practice, and the link between invisible sickness and water was fully understood. More importantly, it was a matter of resources. Fuel for the galley fire was also rationed. It was needed for cooking the crew's meals and for the blacksmith's forge. The idea of using precious wood or charcoal just to boil water for 100 men would have been seen as an incredible waste. So, you drank it as it was, worms and all. You force yourself to take another swallow of the slimy, living water. It's nauseating, but you know you need it. Dehydration on a hot deck was a constant danger. Around you, the other men down their ration without a second thought. Their faces impassive. They're used to it. This is their normal. As you lower your cup, you feel a profound sense of alienation. Your body, your modern sensibilities, are screaming in protest. This single cup of water represents the vast, unbridgeable gulf between your world and this one. Here, a mouthful of stagnant, worm-infested water is not a crisis. It is a gift, a carefully guarded resource that keeps you alive for one more day. The quartermaster locks the cask, his expression making it clear that there will be no refills. You look at the small amount of liquid left in your cup, wondering how you will make it last until tomorrow's ration. Your throat is already dry. After the grim ritual of the water ration, it's time for the first meal of the day. The ship's cook, a one-eyed man with a permanent scowl and a startlingly large meat cleaver tucked into his belt, begins to hand out the provisions. There's no hot breakfast. That's a luxury reserved for later in the day. If you're real lucky, your morning meal consists of a single item, the legendary staple of the seafaring diet, hardtack. You're handed a thick, grayish-white biscuit, about the size of your palm. It feels unnervingly heavy, more like a piece of stone or wood than something edible. You examine it closely. It's incredibly dense and hard, perforated with a few small holes. This is ship's biscuit, also known as a sea biscuit or pilot bread. It was, in essence, a simple flour and water dough, baked multiple times until it was completely devoid of moisture. This process made it incredibly durable, capable of lasting for months, or even years, without spoiling in the traditional sense. It was the perfect, non-perishable carbohydrate for long voyages, a well-known cornerstone of maritime history. The problem was that it went bad. The problem was that it was nearly impossible to eat. You try to take a bite. It's a mistake. Your teeth, healthy and strong by modern standards, can't make a dent. It's like trying to bite into a ceramic tile. You hear a low chuckle from a nearby sailor who is watching you with amusement. He takes his own piece of hardtack. With a practiced motion, smacks it hard against the wooden railing of the ship. He then pops a broken piece into his mouth and begins to gnaw on it patiently, letting his saliva slowly soften it into a chewable paste. You follow his example, breaking your own biscuit against the mast. It shatters into a few smaller, jagged pieces. You pick up a fragment and are about to put it in your mouth when the same sailor stops you. Best knock it first. New blood, he advises. Without looking up from his own task of gnawing, he demonstrates, taking another piece of his hardtack and tapping it firmly on the deck. As he does, a few small, black insects fall out of the holes and scurry away. They are weevils. This is the famous, and famously disgusting, secret of hardtack. While the biscuit itself was too dry to mold, it was the perfect breeding ground for insects. Weevil larvae would be laid in the flour before it was even baked, and they would hatch weeks or months later in the dark, stuffy hold of the ship. They would then proceed to eat their way through the biscuits, creating a network of tunnels. This infestation was so common that sailors simply accepted it as part of the meal. The practice of tapping the biscuit before eating was a genuine able manner of the sea, a way to dislodge at least some of the unwanted protein. The sailors even had a grim joke about it. When choosing between two weevils, you should always choose the lesser of two weevils. You look down at your own piece of biscuit with a new sense of horror. You tap it on the deck as instructed, and, sure enough, two small, brown beetles crawl out and drop to the grimy planks. Your stomach turns. The sailor beside you just shrugs. They call them ship's punctuations. He says, just adds a bit of meat. Better than maggots. Anyway, the casual acceptance is what's most shocking. Historians still discuss the nutritional reality of this diet. On paper, hardtack provided the necessary calories for hard labor. But what was the real cost? The constant battle with infested food, the dental damage from trying to eat something rock hard, and the sheer psychological weariness of such a monotonous diet. Some scholars argue that the poor quality of the food was a significant contributing factor to the notoriously short tempers and rebellious nature of sailors and pirates. It's one thing to face danger, but it's another to do it on a perpetually empty and queasy stomach. Was the infamous pirate rage fueled as much by weevils as it was by rum? It's an improbable but compelling idea. You have a choice. You can go hungry, or you can eat the infested biscuit. Hunger wins. You break off a small piece, trying to ignore the network of tiny tunnels crisscrossing its interior. You pop it in your mouth, not chewing, but letting it off, just as you saw the other sailor do. The taste is bland, dusty, and slightly sour. It slowly dissolves into a thick, gritty paste in your mouth. You swallow it down, feeling the lump slide into your stomach. This is your fuel for the morning's work of hauling ropes, climbing rigging, and scrubbing decks, a process that uses sand and seawater, never fresh water. You look around at the other men. Many of them are dunking their hardtack into their morning grog or the slimy water from their cups. This was the preferred method. It's often the biscuit enough to be chewed and had the added benefit of drowning any weevils that hadn't been knocked out. You make a mental note to try that next time. For now, you slowly and methodically work your way through the rest of your buck-fill, rock-hard breakfast. You are learning another fundamental rule of this life. Disgust is a luxury you cannot afford. The hardtacks, it's like a stone in your stomach as you go about your morning chores. The work is grueling, repetitive, and exposes every muscle you didn't know you had. By midday, under the relentless glare of the sun, you are exhausted, thirsty, and ravenously hungry. The single, weevil-infested biscuit feels like a distant memory. Finally, the cook signals that the main meal of the day is ready. The smell that drifts from the galley is, for once, not entirely unpleasant. It's a thick, savory smell of stew, and your stomach crumbles in anticipation. You get in line with the other men, your wooden bowl and spoon in hand. The cook, still scowling, ladles a brownish, lumpy stew into your bowl. You see some chunks of what might be vegetables floating alongside pieces of meat. For a moment, you feel a surge of optimism. Maybe the food isn't all bad. You find a spot on the deck, out of the way of the working crew, and take your first spoonful. The broth is heavily salted, but not terrible. You spare a piece of meat with your spoon. It's tough, stringy, and requires a great deal of chewing. The texture is more like rubber than any meat you've ever eaten, and there's a faint, underlying taste, a hint of rancidity, a flavor that is just on the edge of being spoiled. This is your introduction to the other pillar of the nautical diet, salted meat. Just like the hardtack, this was a product of necessity. Before refrigeration, the only way to preserve meat for a long sea voyage was to pack it in barrels filled with salt brine. This process drew out the moisture and prevented the growth of bacteria, allowing beef or pork to last for months. This is a widely known historical fact of provisions at sea. What's less appreciated is just how awful the final product was. The heavy salting process destroyed the texture of the meat, making it incredibly tough and chewy. It also gave it a powerful, salty flavor that bordered on inedible. As you chew, and chew, and chew, you notice the other sailors have a specific technique. They will often dip the meat into their water or grog ration to wash off some of the excess salt and to help soften it. But even then, it's a struggle. You hear stories from the older men about salt horse so tough that sailors would carve it into buttons or belt buckles as a morbid joke. They weren't always exaggerating, but the toughness and saltness were only part of the problem. You take another bite, and this time you get a piece that is distinctly off. The rancid flavor is strong, and the texture is slimy. This reveals the darker, lesser-known side of salted meat. The preservation process wasn't always perfect. If the brine concentration wasn't right, or if the meat was of poor quality to begin with, it would begin to spoil slowly in the barrel. It wouldn't rot in the conventional sense, but it would turn rancid, developing a foul taste and a greenish or grayish sheen. The ship's cook would be tasked with making this semi-rotten meat palatable. Their main tools were heavy spices, if available, onions, garlic, and boiling it for hours in a stew. Anything to disguise the flavor of decay. The perpetual stew or slush fund pot in the galley was a real thing on some ships. Leftovers from every meal were thrown back into the pot, which was kept simmering for days on end. It saved on resources, but it also meant that bits of old, possibly tainted food were constantly being recycled into new meals. The question of how much spoiled food pirates and sailors knowingly consume is a subject of historical debate. Was it a constant, accepted reality, or an occasional misfortune? Most evidence points to the former. Provisions were often bought from corrupt suppliers who would pass off old, poor quality barrels of meat as fresh. By the time the crew discovered the meat was bad, they would be weeks out at sea with no other options. You either ate the rancid meat, or you ate nothing. The connection between this diet and diseases like dysentery, the bloody flux, was undeniable. The constant ingestion of spoiled food and foul water wreaked havoc on their digestive systems. You look down into your bowl. The stew that seemed so appealing just a few minutes ago now looks like a bowl of potential sickness. You see the other men eating without complaint. They are picking out the worst-looking pieces, but they are eating. Their survival depends on it. You push a suspicious-looking piece of meat to the side of your bowl and focus on the broth and the few soft, boiled root vegetables. It's a small compromise, a way to get some calories without risking the most obviously tainted parts. You finish what you can, your hunger only partially sated, and a new layer of anxiety settling in. You realize that every meal on this ship is a gamble. Every sip of water, every bite of biscuit, every spoonful of stew is a roll of the dice. You are playing a game of Russian roulette with your digestive system. This constant, low-grade food poisoning was a part of daily life, a baseline of misery that everyone was expected to endure. It dawns on you that the romanticized image of a pirate feast, piles of roasted meats and overflowing tankards, was a rare, shore-based exception. The reality was this: a daily struggle to force down food that was, at its best, monotonous and unpleasant, and at its worst, a direct threat to your life. Your bowl is empty, but your stomach feels heavy and uncertain. The dubious stew slosh-s in your stomach as the afternoon wears on. You've been working, trying to ignore the persistent, low-level nausea. But now, a more urgent and unavoidable need arises. The water, the grog, and the stew have run their course. You need to use the toilet. The memory of last night stirring the side of the head comes flooding back, and you feel a fresh wave of dread. You've been putting it off, hoping the urge would somehow magically disappear. It has not. You make your way towards the bow of the ship. Your steps hesitant. The area is, thankfully, unoccupied. The sun is high, and there is no shadow, no place to hide. You are completely exposed. The structure itself is even more terrifying in the daylight. It's just a simple wooden grate, positioned at the very front of the ship, hanging directly over the churning sea below. To the sides, some coarse netting is strung, presumably for emergencies, or perhaps for those who prefer a different, bouncier experience. You take a deep breath, trying to steady your nerves, and step out onto the grate. The wood is slick with sea spray and who knows what else. You grip the railing of the ship tightly, remembering the old sailor's advice. One hand for the ship. The view is dizzying. The ship's bow rises and falls with each swell, and through the gaps in the grate, you can see the deep blue water moving swiftly below. It feels like you're perched at the end of a diving board. A very, very dirty diving board. You brace yourself and get into position. The sheer awkwardness and vulnerability of the act are overwhelming. You are squatting in broad daylight, in full view of anyone who happens to be on the foredeck. Your back is to the rest of the crew, but you can feel their potential gaze like a physical weight. This complete lack of privacy is a well-documented feature of life on these ships. It was a great equalizer. Everyone from the lowest cabin boy to the highest-ranking officer, save the captain, used the same facility. There was no executive washroom on a pirate ship. As if the humiliation weren't enough, nature decides to add insult to injury. Die, wave, larger than the others, crashes against the bow. A plume of cold, salty spray erupts upwards, drenching you from the waist down. You gasp, clinging to the rail. As the ship dips, you are now soaked, cold, and profoundly miserable. This, you learn, is a common occurrence. Using the head was a gamble with the ocean. Sailors would often try to time their visits with the rhythm of the waves, but a rogue swill could catch anyone off guard. The area was perpetually damp and foul, and so were the poor souls who had to use it. This brings up a lesser-known but critical detail about the design. Why the bow? Why not the stern? It seems counterintuitive to place the toilets at the front, where the spray is worst and where the waste can be blown back onto the ship. Historians and naval architects had debated this for years. The most common explanation is twofold. First, the prevailing winds would theoretically carry the smell away from the rest of the ship, particularly away from the officers on the quarterdeck at the stern. It was a design that prioritized the comfort of the command over the crew. Second, the stern of the ship was often where the captain's cabin was located, with its ornate windows. No captain wanted the view from his private quarters to be obstructed, so the crew was sent to the front. The debate continues about whether this was a deliberately classist design or simply a traditional layout that no one had thought to question or improve upon. Whatever the reason, the result was the same: a wet, miserable, and dangerously exposed experience for the common sailor. You finish your business as quickly as humanly possible, your heart pounding from the combination of vertigo and humiliation. As you scramble back onto the relative safety of the solid deck, you feel a profound sense of relief, immediately followed by disgust. You are wet, and you know it isn't just seawater. You have been rinsed by the Atlantic, and the experience has left you feeling dirtier than before. You look at your soaked trousers and realize there is no way to wash them. There are no spare clothes. You will simply have to wait for them to dry on your body, encrusted with salt and filth. You walk away from the bow, trying to appear nonchalant, as if this is a perfectly normal part of your day. You see some of the other crew members glance at your wet clothes, a few with smirks on their faces. It's a rite of passage. The new guy has been officially baptized by the head. The experience solidifies a terrible truth in your mind. On this ship, even the most basic, private human functions are stripped of all dignity. You are not just a worker. You are an animal, forced to perform bodily functions in a way that is public, unsanitary, and degrading. The memory of the cold spray, the dizzying height, and the complete exposure will stay with you. And you know, with a sinking heart, that you will have to do it all again tomorrow. As evening falls, you retreat once more to the hot, crowded confines of the berthing deck. You climb into your hammock, your clothes still stiff and damp with dried seawater and filth from your misadventure at the head. Your body aches from the day's labor, and all you want is the oblivion of sleep. But rest is hard to find. As you lie in the darkness, surrounded by the snores and coughs of the other men, you become aware of a new torment, an insistent, maddening itch. It starts on your scalp, a tiny, prickling sensation. You scratch it, but the relief is fleeting. Then you feel it on your chest, under your arm, along the waistband of your trousers. It's a persistent, crawling itch that seems to be everywhere at once. In the flickering lamplight, you see the men around you scratching themselves with a kind of weary resignation. They scratch their beards, their chests, their legs, a constant, low-level fidgeting that never seems to stop. You have been welcomed by the ship's most loyal and populous residents, lice. This is an unavoidable and historically accurate misery of life at sea. In the cramped, unwashed conditions of a pirate ship, lice infestations were not a possibility. They were a certainty. These tiny, parasitic insects thrived in the seams of clothing and the warmth of human hair. With no means to wash clothes or bodies with hot water, eradicating them was impossible. Everyone had them. They were a shared burden, a constant companion. You try to ignore the itching, to will it away, but it's no use. The sensation of tiny things crawling on your skin is driving you to distraction. You remember the old pirate's greasy, tar-caked hair and suddenly understand its purpose in a visceral way. It was a desperate, disgusting attempt to combat this very torment. Other sailors had different, equally grim methods. A lesser-known practice was making embrace. Sailors would pick two lice off themselves, place them on a tin plate, and bet on which one would crawl to the edge first. It was a morbid form of entertainment born from a situation they were powerless to change. The lice weren't just a source of maddening discomfort. They were also vectors for disease. Body lice are notorious carriers of epidemic typhus, often called ship fever or gale fever. This disease thrived in crowded, unsanitary conditions like warships, prisons, and, of course, pirate vessels. The symptoms were brutal: high fever, headaches, a severe rash, and delirium. An outbreak of typhus could sweep through a crew, incapacitating dozens of men and leaving the ship dangerously undermanned. Historians still argue about the true death toll of diseases like typhus versus direct combat in the Age of Sail. It's a sobering debate, but many scholars believe that for every sailor or pirate killed by a cannonball or sword, several more died from the diseases that festered in their clothes and bunks. The louse, in this context, was a far more dangerous enemy than a Spanish galleon. The itching intensifies. You run a hand through your hair and your fingers snag on something. You pull it out and hold it close to the dim light. It's a small, grayish insect. The sight of it, the physical proof of your infestation, sends a wave of revulsion through you. You feel a frantic urge to strip off all your clothes, to scrub your skin raw, to do anything to get clean. But you can't. You are trapped. Your clothes are the only ones you have. Your hammock is infested. The air is infested. The entire ship is a thriving ecosystem for parasites, and you are just the newest habitat. You look over at the man in the hammock next to you. He is methodically running a fine-tooth comb through his beard, pausing every so often to crush something between his thumbnails. HES not angry or disgusted. HES performing a routine chore, like mending a sail or sharpening a knife. This is combing for chats, a daily ritual. This level of desensitization is what you find most disturbing. These men have been living with this torment for so long that it has become a mundane part of their existence. The constant itching is their baseline reality. You lie back in your hammock, defeated. You try to find a position where the itching is less intense. But it's impossible. You are a walking buffet. The ship rocks gently, a motion that should be soothing but now feels like it's just jostling your tiny tormentors. You realize that the filth on this ship isn't just on the outside. It's not just the grime on the deck or the rot in the food. It has burrowed its way under your clothes and into your hair. It has literally gotten under your skin. The line between you and the ship's squalor is dissolving. You are not just living in it. You are becoming part of it. The itching is a constant, physical reminder of that fact. Sleep, when it finally comes, will not be a peaceful escape. It will be a brief, fitful truce in a war against an enemy you can feel but can never truly defeat. Your sleep is a shallow, itchy twilight, punctuated by the ship's groans and the scratching of the men around you. You're startled awake not by the boatswain's pipe, but by a different sound, a soft, frantic scrabbling, unnerving close to your head. You freeze, listening. It's followed by a faint squeak. Your eyes snap open. In the pre-dawn gloom, you see a dark shape scurry along one of the thick ceiling beams just above your hammock. It's a rat, and it's not small. The creature pauses, its whiskers twitching, its beady black eyes seeming to stare right at you. Then, with another swift, fluid motion, it disappears into the shadows. Your heart is hammering against your ribs. You are not alone in your hammock. You are sharing your sleeping space with the ship's other 30 crew. As your eyes scan the darkness, you start to see them everywhere. Shadowy movements along the edges of the deck. The occasional flick of a long, naked tail disappearing behind a barrel. The ship is infested. This is, of course, a quintessential image of old sailing ships. The presence of rats is a historical cliché, but the reality was far more grim and pervasive than we often imagine. Ships were the perfect environment for rats. They offered shelter from the elements, a steady supply of food in the cargo hold, and endless places to hide and breed. A single pair of rats could produce hundreds of offspring in a year, meaning a ship's rat population could explode exponentially during a long voyage. They were a constant, destructive presence. You slowly, carefully, sit up in your hammock, trying not to make any sudden movements. You remember the hardtack from yesterday. The cook had hung the sack of biscuits from a ceiling beam, a common practice to try and keep it away from the rats. But rats are expert climbers. They would run along the ropes and beams, chew through the canvas sacks, and get into the provisions anyway. They contaminated far more food than they ate. Their droppings endured unfouling barrels of grain and flour. This made them a direct threat to the crew's survival, turning precious, ration food into a source of disease. As you sit there, you learn a strange, lesser-known fact about these shipboard pests. There were typically 2 different species of rat competing for dominance on a single vessel. The smaller, agile black rat, Rattus rattus, which preferred to live high up in the rigging and beams, and the larger, more aggressive brown rat, Rattus norvegoticus, which tended to dominate the lowered X in the bilge. A pirate ship was often the site of an invisible, ongoing war between these 2 rat factions. Sailors would sometimes say that if you stopped seeing the black rats, it was a bad sign. It meant the bigger, nastier brown rats had taken over completely. The debate among historians here is not about whether rats were present, but about how directly they were linked to specific plague outbreaks on ships. While we know that the fleas carried by black rats were the primary vector for the bubonic plague, the Black Death of the 14th century, the role of shipboard rats in spreading other diseases during the Golden Age of Piracy is more complex. They were certainly carriers of pathogens that could cause food poisoning, like salmonella and leptoptosis, but pinning specific outbreaks on them, separate from all the other unsanitary conditions, is a difficult academic exercise. What is certain is that they were a significant part of a deeply unhealthy environment. A sudden thump from across the room makes you jump. One of the sleeping sailors has reflexively thrown a boot at a dark shape's cuddling near his sea chest. There's a squeal, and then silence. The man mutters something in his sleep and rolls over. You realize that, just like the mice, the rats are a battle that has already been lost. The crew and the rats have settled into a state of hostile coexistence. The men kill them when they can, but they know they can never get rid of them. The rats, in turn, have learned to be cunning and quick. You swing your legs out of the hammock, your bare feet touching the deck. you feel a new sense of revulsion, imagining what you might be stepping on in the darkness. From now on, you will never walk around this ship barefoot again. You think of the food stores below, of the water casks, how many rats have crawled over them, how much of their filth has ended up in the food you're eating and the water you're drinking. The thought is nauseating. The ship is not just a vessel for carrying pirates. It's a floating, self-contained ecosystem of filth, and the rats are one of its apex predators. They are a constant, visible reminder of the decay and contamination that permeates every plank of wood. The squeaking starts again, this time from a different direction. It's a sound you will have to get used to. The background music of your life at sea. It's the sound of your countless, unseen roommates going about their business. The ship is their world. You are just living in it, and eating their leftovers. Weeks bleed into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. The initial shock of your new life has dulled into a state of weary, grim acceptance. The foul water, the weevil-infested biscuits, the itchy companionship of lice. It's all become your new normal. You have fallen into the rhythm of the ship, a routine of hard labor and fitful sleep. One day, while holding on a stiff tardrill, you happen to glance down at your own clothes. The sight gives you pause. Your shirt, which was once a respectable, if plain, garment, is now a testament to your journey. It is stiff with salt, sweat, and grime. A large, dark stain on the sleeve marks where you spilled a ladle of greasy stew last week. A splatter pattern near the cuff is from a fish that was gutted on the deck. The color is dark and shiny with the grease from your own unwashed neck and hair. The fabric itself is starting to thin in places, particularly at the elbows and shoulders, worn down by constant friction. It smells faintly of stale sweat, tar, and the general, all-pervading funk of the ship. It is, you realize with a jolt, becoming just like the clothes of every other man on this vessel. You look around at your crewmates. Their clothing is in even worse condition. You see shirts with gaping holes, trousers patched with mismatched scraps of canvas, and jackets where the original color is completely obscured by a thick patina of filth. This is the reality of pirate fashion. The romantic image of pirates in billowing white shirts and fine coats is a fantasy, likely born from descriptions of captains like Black Bellamy, who would plunder fine clothes and wear them. For the average pirate, clothing was purely functional, and it was worn until it literally fell apart. This is a simple historical fact that clashes with our cinematic depictions. There was no laundry day on a pirate ship. As you know, fresh water was far too precious to be used for washing clothes, and washing them in salt water was a terrible idea. It wouldn't remove grease or grime effectively, and it would leave the fabric impregnated with salt crystals. As the clothes dried, the salt would chafe the skin raw, leading to painful rashes and sores. So, the only option was to not wash them at all, ever. This leads to a little-known and rather disgusting detail: the life cycle of a sailor's shirt. A man would wear a single set of clothes for weeks, or more likely, months on end. He would work in them, sleep in them, eat in them. The clothes would absorb his sweat, the grease from his food, the tar from the ropes, and the grime from the deck. This accumulation of filth would actually make the fabrics different. In a strange way, more durable. It became less like cloth and more like a kind of organic armor. However, this process couldn't last forever. The combination of constant wear and the corrosive effects of sweat and dirt would eventually cause the fibers to break down. The clothes wouldn't just get dirty, they would begin to rot, literally decomposing on the wearer's body. A shirt would eventually become so thin and tattered that it would disintegrate, forcing the sailor to try and acquire a new one, usually by looting it from a captured vessel. The historical debate around this topic is a subtle one. Did pirates have any sense of aesthetics or presentation? Or was it pure, abject pragmatism? Some historians argue that the adoption of certain styles, like sashes or bandanas, was not just practical, for holding weapons or absorbing sweat, but also a form of personal expression, a way to add a bit of flair to an otherwise grim wardrobe. Others maintain that for the vast majority of the crew, clothing was the last thing on their minds. Survival was paramount, and what you wore was irrelevant as long as it kept the worst of the sun and wind off your skin. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. A captain might cultivate a fearsome image with a fine red coat, but the man swabbing the decks was just trying to keep his trousers from falling apart. You pull at the fabric of your own sleeve. It feels rough and foreign against your skin. You remember the feeling of clean, soft growth, and it seems like a memory from another life. The clothes you are wearing have become a second skin, a shell of filth that you carry with you at all times. They are a physical record of your time on this ship. The process is slow, insidious. You don't just get dirty one day. You accumulate layers of grime over time, until the filth becomes a part of you. You realize with a sinking feeling that you have stopped noticing the smell of your own clothes. Your senses have finally, mercifully, adapted. You have become desensitized to the stench because you are now a contributing source of it. You look at your hands, calloused and ingrained with dirt that no amount of scrubbing ends and will ever remove. You look at your rotting clothes. The transformation is well underway. You are not just looking like a pirate. You are slowly, inexorably, becoming one layer of grime at a time. The heat on the open ocean is a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothers the ship. The deck radiates warmth. The tar in the seams grows soft and sticky, and the air is thickened still. In the suffocating heat, the stench of the ship seems to ripen, becoming richer and more potent. Sweat trickles down your face and back, pasting your rotting shirt to your skin. The desire to feel the coolness of water on your body is an almost unbearable craving. You look out at the vast, shimmering expanse of the ocean and a tempting thought enters your mind. Why not just jump in? A quick swim could wash away weeks of accumulated grime and offer a blessed, temporary relief from the heat and the filth. You mention this idea to an older, more seasoned pirate who is sitting nearby, methodically sharpening a knife. He looks up at you, his expression a mixture of pity and contempt. He doesn't say anything at first. He just shakes his head slowly. Bad idea. Boy out. He finally grunts, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the deck. Worse than you think. He explains that taking a seawater bath was an extremely rare and generally foolish act for several reasons. The first and most obvious reason is a well-known historical danger. Sharks. The waters that pirates frequented, like the Caribbean, were teeming with them. A lone man swimming in the open ocean was an easy and inviting target. Ships, especially ones where crew were gutting fish or discarding waste overboard, would often attract the following of opportunistic sharks. To voluntarily enter the water was to essentially offer yourself up as a potential meal. But the danger was just from sharks. He points to the side of the ship with his knife. See that? He asks. You look and see a faint, greenish-brown fuzz clinging to the hull below the waterline. It's a layer of algae, barnacles, and other marine growth. This fouling was a constant problem for wooden ships. It created dragons, slowed them down. That stuff LL slice you to ribbons, he says. The shells of the barnacles were razor sharp. If you were swimming alongside, the ship and the swell pushed you against the hull. You could receive dozens of deep, nasty cuts. And in this environment, any open wound was a potential death sentence. This leads to the lesser known, and perhaps more important, reason why seawater bathing was avoided, as the old sailor explains. If you did manage to avoid being eaten by a shark or sliced by barnacles, the salt water itself was a problem. You might feel clean for a few moments, but as the water evaporated from your skin, it would leave behind a crust of salt. This salty residue would chafe horribly against your skin and clothes, especially in sensitive areas. It would cause painful rashes, and if you had any small cuts or scratches, which everyone did, the salt would get into them, causing an intense, burning pain and preventing them from healing properly. You would end up trading the discomfort of being filthy for the very real pain of being salted like a piece of beef. The historical debate here centers on the frequency and context of such activities. Did pirates never swim? That seems unlikely. Some accounts suggest that in calm, shallow, protected coves or lagoons, pirates might take the opportunity to clean themselves and their ship. But in the open ocean, while underway, the consensus is that it was almost unheard of. The risks simply far outweighed the temporary reward. The question that remains is one of choice versus necessity. Did they avoid bathing because they were inherently dirty people who didn't care? Or were they making a rational calculation based on the very real dangers and painful consequences? The evidence strongly suggests the latter. It was that they chose to be filthy. It's that the alternative was often worse. The old pirate finishes his explanation with a grim story. Had a young fella on my last ship. Cocky kid. Thought he knew better. Jumped in on a calm day. Just like this. We was moving slow, so he thought he could keep up. He pauses, testing the edge of his knife with his thumb. We threw him a rope. He was laughing. Then he stopped. His face just went white. We pulled him in. Something had taken a piece out of his leg. Not a shark. Something smaller. Barracuda. Maybe. He didn't die from the bite. He died a week later. Fevers and screaming, cause the wound got foul. The story hangs in the air. A stark and brutal warning. You look back out at the glittering, inviting water. It no longer looks refreshing. It looks treacherous, filled with hidden teeth and painful consequences. The momentary relief it promises is a siren's call, luring you towards infection, injury, or worse. You nod your thanks to the old pirate. He just grunts in reply and goes back to his sharpening. The lesson is clear. On this ship, you are condemned to your own filth. The endless ocean surrounding you is not a bath. It is a barrier. It is the very thing that keeps you trapped in your own grime. You will remain hot. You will remain itchy. And you will remain profoundly, unequivocally dirty. The craving to be clean subsides, replaced by a grim resignation. You wipe the sweat from your brow with the back of a filthy hand and get back to work. One afternoon, a scream of agony cuts through the mundane sounds of the ship. Its sharpened horrificously close. Everyone freezes. A young pirate, no older than yourself, has had his hand caught in a block and tackle while adjusting a sail. The heavy wooden block, swaying with the momentum of the ship, has crushed his fingers against the mast. He is now on the deck, cradling his mangled hand, his face pale with shock and pain. The idyllic blue sky and the gentle rocking of the ship suddenly feel like a mocking backdrop to a scene of brutal reality. The captain's voice booms from the quarterdeck. Get the surgeon. There's a moment of confused shuffling. Then, two men break off and head towards the galley. You watch, bewildered. The galley. A few minutes later, they return, half dragging the ship's cook. It's the same one-eyed, perpetually scowling man who doles out the hardtack and stew. He is wiping his greasy hands on his apron, and tucked into his belt, alongside his meat cleaver, is a small, roll-up pouch of tools. This is the ship's surgeon. The historical reality of the ship's surgeon is one of the most terrifying aspects of life at sea. On a naval vessel, the surgeon was often a trained, if not particularly skilled, professional, but on a pirate ship, the crew was lucky if they had anyone with even a sliver of medical knowledge. More often than not, the role of surgeon was assigned to the man who was best with a knife. This was frequently the ship's carpenter, who was skilled with a saw, or the cook, who was adept at butchering animals. Their knowledge of human anatomy was minimal, and their understanding of infection and disease was non-existent. They were craftsmen, not doctors, and their job was to fix broken bodies with the same brutal pragmatism they used to fix a broken mast. The cook kneels beside the injured man, his expression unchanged. He unrolls his pouch on the grimy deck. The surgical instruments are a horrifying collection of utilitarian tools. You see a few sharp knives of varying sizes, a thick needle and some thread, a pair of pliers, and a small, rust-flecked handsaw, the kind a carpenter would use to cut wood. There is no anesthetic. There are no antiseptics. He examines the hand. The fingers are a mess of broken bone and torn flesh. The cook wastes no time on pleasantries. He looks up at the men holding the injured pirate down. Give him this. He grunts, pulling a bottle of rum from his pocket. The injured man is forced to drink a long, desperate swig of the raw spirit. This is the only anesthetic available. Enough alcohol to hopefully dull the senses or, ideally, render the patient unconscious. It rarely worked that well. The cook then proceeds to treat the injury. He uses his pliers to pull out the largest splinters of bone. His movements rough and deficient. The young pirate screams again, a choke, gargling sound. The cook ignores him. This is where a little known, and truly gruesome, detail of pirate surgery comes in, for injuries that weren't severe enough for amputation. The surgeon would often perform a debridement, which meant cutting away the dead or damaged tissue to clean the wound. The theory, as they understood it, was that removing the mangled parts would help the healthy parts heal. In practice, it was just more butchery with an unsterilized knife, often introducing new infections into the wound. The historical debate among medical historians is a grim one. Did these shipboard surgeons do more harm than good? It's a difficult question. In the case of a completely shattered limb, amputation was the only option to prevent gangrene, and a swift, brutal amputation could, in theory, save a life. However, for less severe injuries, the intervention of a man with a dirty knife and no medical knowledge likely turned a survivable injury into a fatal one by introducing infection. Scholars pore over the few surviving ships, logs, and accounts, trying to assess the outcomes. The conclusion is generally that survival rates were abysmal. The surgeon was not a healer. He was a last resort, a desperate gamble against certain death. The cook finishes his grim work on the young pirate's hand. He has removed a few of the finger bones. That work rushed beyond repair. He now has to close the wounds. He takes his large needle and thick wax thread, the same kind used to mend sails, and begins to crudely stitch the remaining flesh together. The young pirate, as merciful, he fainted from the pain. The final step of the procedure is cauterization. The cook barks in order, and another pirate brings a small brazier of glowing coals from the galley. The cook takes one of his knives, heats the blade in the coals until it glows a dull red, and then presses it against the stitches. There's a sickening sizzle and the smell of burnt flesh fills the air. A new and horrific addition to the ship's olfactory profile. The unconscious man convulses. This brutal practice was believed to stop the bleeding and purify the wound by burning it. The surgery is over. The cook wipes his tools on his apron, rolls them up, and heads back to the galley, perhaps to finish preparing the evening still. The injured pirate is carried below decks, his fate now hanging by a thread. He will either survive, crippled and scarred, or he will die in a few days from a raging fever. You stand there, frozen, the young man's screams still echoing in your ears. You have just witnessed pirate medicine firsthand, and you pray, with every fiber of your being, that you never, ever get seriously hurt on this ship. The memory of the gruesome surgery haunts you for days. Every time you see the cook, you don't see a man who provides food. You see a butcher with a hot knife and a wood saw. The injured pirate, thankfully, seems to be surviving, though you hear his groans of pain from the sick bay curtain in the corner of the berthing deck. His survival, however, is the exception, not the rule. You soon learn just how lucky he was that his injury was contained to his hand. For more serious limb injuries, the only course of action was far more drastic. An older sailor, a man named Finn with a wooden peg leg and a network of scars on his arms, sits with you on the deck one evening as you watch the sun dip below the horizon. He sees you staring at his leg, and a grim, knowing smile touches his lips. Ye wonder in about this, he asks, tapping the wooden stump with his finger. A souvenir from a Spanish cannonball, off the coast of Hispaniola. He then proceeds to tell you the story of his amputation, and, in doing so, he paints a vivid, terrifying picture of the single, most feared medical procedure at sea. The cannonball, he explains, didn't take his leg clean off. It shattered the bone and shredded the muscle below his knee. He was carried below, screaming, and laid out on a table in the captain's cabin, the only space large enough for the grim work ahead. The surgeon on that ship was the carpenter, the large, quiet man who was terrifyingly strong. This is a well-established historical image. The sea dog with a peg leg or a hook for a hand. We see it in every pirate movie, but we rarely linger on the brutal process that created these iconic figures. Amputation was a race against time. Gangrene, a deadly tissue infection, could set in within hours on a shattered limb. The only way to stop it was to remove the limb above the point of injury. The procedure was a standardized, three-step nightmare. First, as Finn describes, came the tourniquet. A rope or a thick strip of leather would be tied tightly around the limb, high above the wound, and twisted with a stick to cut off the blood flow. This was crucial to prevent the patient from bleeding to death. Then, the surgeon, in this case, the carpenter, would take a long, sharp knife. He didn't say a word. Finn recalls, his voice low, just handed me a leather strap to bite on. Then he started cut in. The surgeon would make a circular incision through the skin, fat, and muscle, cutting right down to the bone. The pain, Finn says, was beyond description. A white-hot agony that blotted out the world. The rum they deep poured down his throat did nothing to stop it. The second step was the saw. Once the bone was exposed, the surgeon would take his handsaw, the very same one he used to cut planks for repairing the hull, and begin to saw through the bone. The sound, Finn says, was the worst part. A deep, grating, vibrating noise that he could feel in his teeth, in his skull. The carpenter's mates had to hold him down with all their strength as his body convulsed on the table. This part had to be done quickly. A skilled surgeon could saw through a femur in less than a minute. The third and final step was cauterization. There were two main methods for this, and this is where a lesser-known, stomach-turning detail emerges. The most common method, as you witnessed with the hand injury, was using a hot knife or a specially shaped cauterizing iron to sear the blood vessels in the surface of the stump. This created a hard, blackened scab of burnt tissue. The alternative method, often used when there was time or means to heat an iron, was to dip the entire stump into a bucket of boiling tar. The hot, sticky pitch would seal the wound, stop the bleeding, and hopefully, in their view, prevent putrefaction. Finn was lucky. His carpenter used a hot iron. The smell, he whispers, like roast pork. I can still smell it sometimes, on hot days. The academic debate surrounding this procedure is intense. Historians and surgeons have studied the techniques described in old naval manuals. Was there any good way to do this? The consensus is that speed was the single most important factor. A faster amputation meant less time for the patient to suffer from shock and blood loss. The best surgeons were not the most delicate. They were the fastest. They were praised for their ability to remove a leg in under 2 minutes. But the debate continues on the aftercare. With no understanding of sterile procedure, the surgeon would often dress the wound with unwashed rags, sealing in bacteria. The mortality rate from post-amputation infection was astronomically high, likely over 50%, and perhaps as high as 75%. For every man like Finn who survived to get a peg leg, at least 1 or 2 others died. In agony from fever and infection a week later, Finn finishes his story, his gaze distant. They gave me an extra share of the plunder from that prize, he says, patting his wooden leg, in a permanent post as the ship's cook on the next voyage. Ted climbed the rig and with one leg. It was the pirate's version of a disability pension. A man who lost a limb in battle was often compensated according to a pre-agreed scale, a famous part of the pirate code. But the compensation couldn't erase the trauma. You look at Finn, at his peg leg and his haunted eyes, and you finally understand the true cost of the romanticized Jolly Roger lifestyle. It was a life lived on the edge of brutal violence and even more brutal medicine. The hooks and peg legs weren't cool accessories. They were the scars of survival, permanent monuments to a moment of unimaginable pain and terror. A reminder that the carpenter's saw was often the last sound a pirate ever heard. In the weeks that follow, a new and insidious threat begins to creep through the ship. It's not as sudden as a cannonball or as visible as a rat. It's a slow, quiet decay that starts from within. You first notice it in one of the older sailors, a man who was once robust and loud. Now, he seems perpetually exhausted. His skin has taken on a pale, waxy pallor, and his eyes are sunken and dull. He moves slowly, as if his limbs are weighted down with lead. Then, you see him grimace while eating his daily ration of hardtack. A few days later, you notice his gums. They are swollen, purple, and looks often spongy. When he speaks, you can see that they have started to bleed, leaving a faint red tinge on his already ruined teeth. Soon after, he complains that his teeth feel loose in their sockets. This is the beginning of scurvy. Scurvy, or the plague of the sea, is one of the most infamous diseases in maritime history. It's a well-known fact that it's caused by a severe deficiency of vitamin C, a nutrient essential for the body to produce collagen, the protein that holds our tissues together. Without it, the body literally begins to fall apart. On a long voyage, with a diet consisting of nothing but salted meat and hard biscuits, a pirate's intake of vitamin C was virtually zero. The fresh fruits and vegetables that contain it would spoil within the first week or two of leaving port. As the days turn into weeks, the sailor's condition deteriorates horrifically. His gums become ulcerated, blackening masses of rotting tissue that emit a foul odor. His teeth, no longer anchored in their sockets, begin to fall out one by one, until he can no longer chew his hardtack and has to subsist on broth alone. Dark, ugly bruises, like patches of rot, appear on his legs and arms from the slightest bump, as his capillaries become fragile and burst under the skin. But the most bizarre and terrifying symptom is yet to come. This is a lesser-known and truly ghastly aspect of advanced scurvy. The man begins to complain of intense pain in his legs. You see him clutch at his shin, his face contorted in agony. He tells you that an old wound he received years ago, a simple cut from a knife that had long since healed into a pale scar, has started to ache. You look, and to your horror, you see that the old scar issue is turning dark and swelling. Over the next few days, the scar, a wound that had been healed for a decade, actually reopens, splitting apart as if the injury had just occurred. The collagen that had formed the scar issue is dissolving. The body is literally unhealing itself. Medical historians still marvel at the horrifying completeness of scurvy's effects. The mechanism, the breakdown of collagen, is now understood, but the psychological impact on the sailors who witnessed it is hard to fathom. Imagine watching a man's body disintegrate before your eyes, to see old wounds from his youth miraculously reappear as fresh gashes. To them, it must have seemed like a form of demonic possession or a curse. The debate among historians isn't about the symptoms, which are well documented, but about the slow dawning of the cure. While the British Navy officer James Lind is famously credited with conducting the first clinical trial in 1747, showing that citrus fruits could cure scurvy, the knowledge was anecdotal and piecemeal for centuries before that. Sailors and captains had noticed that certain foods seemed to help, but the connection was scientifically understood. Was it a specific fruit? Was it fresh meat? Was it something in the air on land? This uncertainty meant that for much of the Golden Age of Piracy, scurvy was an unstoppable and mysterious killer. The afflicted sailor is now confined to his hammock, too weak to stand. His breath is fetid, his body is covered in sores, and his mind has begun to wander. He is listless and deeply depressed. Another common symptom of the disease. The crew avoids him. His condition is not contagious, but it is a terrifying mirror, showing them all what their own future might hold if the voyage continues for much longer. There is no cure on board. The ship's surgeon can do nothing. The cook can offer no relief. All they can do is watch him waste away. You look around at the other crew members. You see the subtle signs beginning to appear in them, and you feel them in yourself. The bone-deep weariness that sleep cannot fix, the vague aching in your joints, the tenderness in your own gums when you chew. It's a race against time. The ship must reach land, a place with fresh food and clean water, before the disease takes hold of the entire crew. Scurvy reveals the ultimate vulnerability of these seemingly fearless men. They could face down a warship, survive a hurricane, and endure the most brutal living conditions. But they were powerless against this invisible enemy that crept into their blood and slowly, methodically, took their bodies apart from the inside out. It was a slow, quiet, and disgusting dissolution, a far cry from a glorious death in battle, while the slow, quiet horror of scurvy is taking root in the crew's bodies. A far more aggressive and immediate pestilence makes its appearance. It starts with one man, then two, then a dozen. They complain of severe stomach cramps that double them over in pain. Soon after, the cramps are followed by a violent, unstoppable diarrhea. This is not an ordinary stomach bug. This is dysentery, known to the pirates by its more terrifying undescriptive name, the bloody flux. The disease spreads through the ship with terrifying speed. The berthing deck, already a hot, foul-smelling space, becomes a living hell. The sounds of men groaning in agony are constant, day and night. The air becomes thick with the sickeningly sweet, metallic smell of the disease. The cause is obvious, even if the microbiology was unknown to them. It's the food and water, the stagnant, larvae-infested water, and the semi-rancid, salted meat, all contaminated by the filth of the rats and the general lack of sanitation, have created the perfect breeding ground for the bacteria that cause dysentery. The ship has become a floating petri dish, and now the culture is blooming. You feel the first rumblings in your own gut with a sense of cold, abject terror. You've seen what it does to the others. The initial stages are bad enough, but it's the progression that's truly horrifying. The diarrhea becomes more frequent, more watery, until the afflicted men are too weak to even make it to the head. They foul themselves, their hammocks, and the deck around them. The flimsy sick bay curtains are useless against a plague that affects a third of the crew. The entire lower deck becomes a quarantine zone of misery. This is a well-documented scourge of all armies and navies of the era. Dysentery killed far more soldiers and sailors than combat. It was a disease of crowds and filth, and the pirate ship was the ideal incubator. The men become severely dehydrated, their bodies losing fluids faster than they can take them in. Their faces become gaunt, their eyes sunken. They beg for water, but the ship's putrid, contaminated supply only makes the sickness worse. It's a vicious, deadly cycle. Then comes the symptom that gives the disease its name. The diarrhea begins to contain blood and mucus. The bloody flux is a sign that the lining of the intestines is being destroyed by the infection, sloughing off in ragged chunks. The pain becomes unbearable, a constant, searing fire in the abdomen. The men are not just sick, they are being eaten alive from the inside. A lesser known, and particularly grim, aspect of such an outbreak was the complete breakdown of shipboard routine. A ship at sea requires constant work to stay afloat and on course. Sails need to be trimmed, rigging needs to be maintained, lookout shifts need to be manned, but with a significant portion of the crew either dead or incapacitated. The basic functions of the ship begin to fail. The healthy crew members, a dwindling number, are forced to work double or triple shifts, pushing them to the point of exhaustion and making them more susceptible to the disease themselves. A ship stricken with dysentery was a ghost ship in the making, drifting aimlessly, its crew too weak to even stare. The historical debate here revolves around the specific pathogens. Was the bloody flux primarily caused by the Shigella bacteria, which causes classic bacillary dysentery, or by Proteus, like Entamoeba histolytical, which causes amoebic dysentery? Without modern testing, it's impossible to know for sure, and it was likely a mixture of both. Different pathogens would have been picked up in different ports around the world. What scholars agree on is the outcome: a mortality rate that could be as high as 30 to 40% during a severe outbreak on a crowded ship. It was a fast-moving, efficient killer. The cook, the ship's de facto surgeon, is powerless. He has no medicine for this. He can only watch as his crewmates waste away. He tries brewing teas from willow bark, a source of salicylate acid, similar to aspirin, to combat the fever, but it does nothing for the underlying infection. The men are left to their fate, their survival dependent on the strength of their own constitution. You are one of the lucky ones. You are racked with cramps and fever, and you spend days in a haze of pain and misery, but you do not develop the bloody stage. You are severely weakened and dehydrated, but you are alive. As you slowly regain some strength, you look at the empty hammocks around you. 3 men from your section of the berthing deck are gone. Their bodies were unceremoniously wrapped in a piece of old sailcloth, weighted down with a cannonball, and slipped over the side with a brief, mumbled prayer. There was no time for proper ceremony. The outbreak eventually burns itself out, leaving a decimated, exhausted, and demoralized crew in its wake. The ship feels hollowed out, haunted by the memory of the past week. The filth that caused the disease is still here. The water is still foul. The food is still questionable. The threat has not gone away. It has merely receded, waiting for its next opportunity. You have survived dysentery, but the experience has branded you. You now understand that the true terror of this life is not the violence of men, but the silent, merciless violence of the microscopic world. In the aftermath of the dysentery outbreak, a palpable sense of fear and desperation settles over the surviving crew. The men who have recovered are weak, and those who escaped the worst of it are terrified of a relapse. The ship's surgeon, the cook, finds himself elevated to a position of immense, if reluctant, importance. The crew, desperate for any hope of a cure or preventative, begin to look to him and his meager supplies for salvation. This gives you a rare opportunity to glimpse inside the pirate's medicine chest. One day, you see a sailor approach the cook, his hands trembling. He whispers about a private, personal ailment, a burning shame he contracted in the last war. The cook listens with his usual impassive scowl, then nods and jerks his head towards his sea chest. He rummages inside and produces a small, heavy stone pot. He opens it and gives the sailor a tiny amount of a thick, silvery gray paste, along with a stern warning to use it sparingly. You have just witnessed a 17th century prescription for a sexually transmitted disease, and its primary ingredient is mercury. This is a well-documented and horrifying chapter in the history of medicine. For centuries, mercury was the leading treatment for syphilis, one of the most feared diseases of the age. Doctors and quacks alike believed that the toxic heavy metal could somehow drive the disease out of the body. It was administered in various ways, as an ointment to be rubbed on the skin, as a vapor to be inhaled in a steam bath, or even taken orally in pills. The treatment was, in many ways, as terrible as the disease itself. Mercury poisoning would cause symptoms like excessive salivation, tooth loss, gum ulcers, tremors, and severe neurological damage, including insanity. The grim saying of the time was, "One night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury." Peering into the cook's sea chest is like looking into a cabinet of horrors and false hope. Alongside the terrifying pot of mercury paste, you see his other medicines. There's a pouch of dried willow bark, a common remedy for pain and fever, and one of the few items that actually had some legitimate, if mild, effect. There's a bottle of laudanum, a powerful tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol. This was a pirate's cure-all. It was a potent painkiller, a sedative, and a treatment for diarrhea, as it causes constipation, making it incredibly valuable on a ship plagued by injury and dysentery. It was also highly addictive, and many sailors who relied on it for medical reasons ended up with a dependency they could never shake. Then, there are the truly bizarre items, revealing the blend of superstition and folk medicine that governed their world. You see a small, dried-out toad. This is a fascinating, little-known piece of medical folklore. Dried, powdered toad was sometimes used in an attempt to treat SC or uvula, a form of tuberculosis, or even to ward off the plague. The logic, if you can call it that, was rooted in sympathetic magic, the belief that an ugly, poisonous creature could somehow absorb or fight off an ugly disease. There's also a lump of bezoar. A bezoar is a hard, stone-like mass found in the stomach of an animal, usually a goat, formed from layers of hair and vegetable fiber. For centuries, these were considered one of the most powerful universal antidotes to poison. A king or a wealthy merchant might pay a fortune for a genuine bezoar. A pirate would likely have looted one, considering it as valuable as any jewel. Its effectiveness, of course, was zero. The historical debate here is a fascinating one. How much of pirate medicine was legitimate, albeit primitive, knowledge, and how much was pure superstition? The line is incredibly blurry. Laudanum was effective. Willow bark had a basis in science we now understand. But were these used with any real diagnostic skill? Or were they just thrown at a set of symptoms in desperation? Many historians argue that for pirates, medicine was a chaotic cocktail of looted naval supplies, port town quackery, and folk remedies learned from various cultures. There was no system, only a desperate collection of cures that might be tried one after another, until the patient either recovered or died. The cook closes his chest. The consultation over, the sailor with the pot of mercury shuffles away, his face a mask of shame and fear. The brief glimpse into the ship's pharmacy has been enlightening and deeply unsettling. There is no science here. There is no real healing. There is only a collection of poisons, placebos, and one or two genuinely effective but dangerous substances. The medicine chest is not a source of comfort. It's a box of desperate gambles, a testament to a world where the cures were often as deadly as the diseases they were meant to fight. For the pirates on this ship, getting sick or injured was just the beginning of their troubles. The treatment was often the final, fatal blow. After what feels like an eternity at sea, a cry comes from the lookout perched high on the mast. Land ho! The words send a jolt of electricity through the exhausted crew. Men who were listless and slumped against the railing suddenly straighten up, their eyes straining to see the hazy, green smudge on the horizon. It's land. It's salvation. It's a chance for fresh water, real food, and a break from the floating prison that has been their world. As the ship draws closer to the bustling, ramshackle port town, the mood on board transforms from weary resignation to a kind of feverish, manic excitement. The port is a riot of color, sound, and smell. It's a chaotic, vibrant place, a stark contrast to the monotonous blue and gray of the ocean. But as you get your first proper look, you realize this is no pristine paradise. The harbor water is murky, filled with refuse from the ships on the town. The buildings are a jumble of weathered wood and crumbling plaster, leaning against each other for support. The streets you can see from the deck are narrow, upper alleyways of packed earth and mud. And the smell is a new and complex symphony of foulness, different from the ship's odor, but no less potent. It's a mix of rotting fish, spilled rum, cooking fires, and inadequate sewage. This is not a resort. It's an outpost of civilization clinging to the edge of the wilderness, and it has its own unique brand of filth. Once the ship is anchored and the captain has made his arrangements with the corrupt port officials, the crew is finally granted shore leave. You stumble down the gangplank onto solid ground for the first time in months. The sensation is disorienting. The land seems to sway beneath your feet, a phenomenon known as sea legs. The pirates, however, have only one thing on their minds. They surge past you, a tide of dirty, desperate men, heading straight for the nearest taverns. You follow them, drawn by the noise and the promise of something other than slimy water to drink. You step into a low silencing, smoke-filled room. The air is thick with the smell of cheap rum, sweat, and unwashed bodies, a smell not unlike the ship. But with more people, the floor is covered in a layer of sawdust, which you quickly realize is there to soak up spilled drinks, spit, and vomit. Men are crowded around rough wooden tables, shouting, laughing, and gambling. This is the famous pirate haven, the place of legend. It's every bit as raucous as the stories, but it's also incredibly squalid. You get a mug of rum. It tastes sour and dry, but it's a welcome change. And find a corner to observe. You see your crewmates, men who were on the verge of death from scurvy and dysentery just weeks ago, now spending their hard-earned plunder with reckless abandon. This is a well-documented cycle. The extreme deprivation of seal life led to extreme indulgence on shore. They would drink themselves into a stupor, feast on freshly cooked, though often poorly prepared, food, and seek out the companionship they had been denied for months. This is where a lesser-known, but critically important, part of the pirate ecosystem comes into play. These port towns, places like Tortuga, Port Royal before the earthquake, or Nassau during its Pirate Republic era, were not just places for pirates to rest. They were sophisticated, if chaotic, service economies built entirely around the pirates' needs. The tavern owners, the merchants who would buy their stolen goods, the women who offered them company. Everyone was there to separate the pirates from their silver as quickly and efficiently as possible. The historical debate here focuses on the nature of these pirate havens. Were they true libertarian utopias, free from the oppressive laws of an empire, where men could live as they pleased, or were they simply opportunistic? Lawless slums that preyed on a transient population of violent and desperate men? The answer, as always, is likely a mix of both. For a brief time, places like Nassau did operate with a surprising degree of self-governance based on the pirate code, but they were also incredibly dangerous, dirty, and exploitative. You watch as a fight breaks out between the drunken pirates over a gambling dispute. Knives are drawn, the table is overturned, and the whole tavern erupts in a chaotic brawl before the two are finally separated, both bleeding from minor cuts. This violence, fueled by alcohol and pent-up aggression, was constant, but the more insidious danger was the one you couldn't see. The food, while fresh, was oft uncooked in unsanitary conditions. The water from the town wells could be just as contaminated as the water in the ship's casks, and the fleeting moments of intimacy that the men paid for in the back rooms of the taverns came with a very high price. The port is a double-edged sword. It offers a cure for the diseases of the sea, like scurvy, by providing fresh food, but it simultaneously exposes the pirates to a whole new set of land-based diseases: cholera, typhoid, and, most commonly, a host of sexually transmitted infections that they would then carry back to the ship with them. The cycle of sickness was about to begin anew. The port was not an escape from filth and disease. It was just an exchange of one type for another. You spend a few days in the chaotic embrace of the port town. The initial thrill of being on land quickly gives way to a sense of unease. The constant noise, the casual violence, and the pervasive squalor are exhausting in their own way. You watch your crewmates navigate this world with a familiar recklessness. They have traded the confines of the ship for the confines of the tavern, and their behavior is a frantic explosion of pent-up desires. Most of their time and silver is spent on three things: drink, gambling, and women, and it is the last of these that will prove to be the most lasting and destructive. On the day before you are set to sail, you see one of your crewmates, a young man named Thomas, emerging from a dimly lit alleyway. His face, usually open and cheerful, is drawn and pale. He avoids eye contact and hurries past you, a shadow of shame and worry clinging to him. You don't need to ask to know what's wrong. In the intimate, gossiping world of the ship, secrets are impossible to keep. You've heard the whispers and the grin jokes. Thomas, like many others, has come away from his shore leave with a souvenir from a back alley encounter. He has contracted what the sailors of the time called the Great Pox or the French disease. Syphilis. This is the grim, unromantic reality behind the pirates' hedonistic sprees in port. Sexually transmitted diseases were rampant. In an age before antibiotics, contracting a disease like syphilis or gonorrhea was not just an embarrassment. It was a life sentence. The initial symptoms might be minor: a sore, a rash, a discharge, but the long-term consequences were devastating. Syphilis, in its later stages, could attack the nervous system, leading to blindness, paralysis, dementia, and a painful, lingering death. It was one of the most feared afflictions of the era, and pirate ports, with their transient populations and lack of sanitation, were hotbeds of infection. This is a mainstream historical fact that adds an dark undercurrent to the tales of pirate debauchery. What is lesser known is how pirates, as a community, dealt with this problem. You might expect a survival of the fittest mentality, where a sick man would be ostracized or abandoned, but the pirate code, in its own strange way, sometimes accounted for this. In some articles of agreement, a man who was unable to perform his duties due to an illness contracted on shore, as opposed to in the line of duty, would not receive a full share of the plunder. This wasn't necessarily a punishment, but a pragmatic rule to ensure the fighting strength of the crew was maintained and that shared profits went to those who could actively contribute. However, they wouldn't necessarily throw the man overboard. He would still be a part of the crew, a living, suffering reminder of the dangers of port. The historical debate on this topic is fascinating. How did the prevalence of STDs affect pirate culture and psychology? Some historians argue it contributed to their fatalism and live-for-the-moment attitude. If you knew you were already carrying a slow-acting death sentence in your blood, why not be reckless? Why not drink, fight, and plunder? since a peaceful old age was already off the table. Others suggest it created a culture of deep suspicion and bitterness towards the outside world, particularly the shore-based communities they both relied on undespised. Did it foster a grim, misogynistic camaraderie among the men, who saw women in ports not as partners, but as vectors of disease? The truth is likely a complex mix of all these things, a psychological scar on the pirate psyche that is difficult to fully assess from centuries away. Back on the ship, you see the evidence of the port's revenge. Thomas is not the only one. Several other men are showing the telltale signs of new infections. They try to hide it, but the fear in their eyes is obvious. They know it's coming. They will turn to the ship's surgeon, the cook, who will dole out his useless and toxic mercury paste. They will begin a treatment that will rot their teeth and poison their minds, all in a futile attempt to fight a disease they cannot stop. The ship, which had arrived in port as a vessel full of men suffering from the diseases of the sea, is now being restocked with the diseases of the land. The cycle continues. The brief respite of shore leave has only traded one form of misery for another. As the ship prepares to weigh anchor, you look back at the squalid, vibrant port. It's a place of temporary pleasure and permanent consequence. The pirates came seeking treasure and release, but many of them are leaving with the most insidious kind of booty, a silent, incurable passenger that will travel with them for the rest of their short, brutal lives. The Jolly Roger might promise a short life and a merry one, but it rarely mentioned the slow, ignominious decay that often followed the merriment. The ship is abuzz with the activity of departure. The decks are being cleared, last-minute supplies are being loaded, and the familiar rhythm of sea life is beginning to reassert itself. Amidst this chaos, you seek out one last, precious luxury before returning to the endless, grimy ocean. You find a quiet corner of the harbor, near a public well, where a few other sailors are taking advantage of a final opportunity. You are going to attempt a real wash. You manage to trade a small, pilfered trinket for a bucket and a lump of harsh, lye-based soap. The water from the well is coolant, compared to the ship's slimy bilge water, miraculously clean. You find a semi-secluded spot behind a stack of barrels. Strip off your stiff, rotting clothes, and begin to wash. The sensation is so foreign and so wonderful that it's almost painful. The cool water on your skin is a shock to the system. The soap creates a meager lather, and as you scrub, you see rivers of gray-brown filth running off your body and pooling on the ground. It's a slow, methodical process. You scrub your hair, working the soap into oil, either to try and dislodge the grease, tar, and the families of lice that have taken up residence there. You wash your arms, your chest, your legs, paying special attention to the areas that have been chafed raw by your salt-stiffened clothes. It's more than just getting clean. It feels like an exorcism. You are scrubbing away the accumulated grime of months at sea, trying to reclaim some small piece of your former self. This simple act, so mundane in your old life, now feels like the ultimate indulgence, a baptism of renewal. This is a common historical experience for sailors returning from long voyages. The first bath was a significant, almost ritualistic event. As you wash, you uncover the landscape of your own body, and it's a sobering sight. You are thinner than you remember, your ribs more prominent. Your skin, where it isn't tanned and leathery from the sun, is pale and unhealthy looking. It's a canvas of small scars, healing sores from insect bites, and the dark, purplish bruises that are the lingering signature of near scurvy. Your body is a living document of the voyage, a testament to the filth and deprivation you have endured. Then you attempt the impossible, washing your clothes. You dunk your shirt and trousers into the bucket of water. The water immediately turns a dark, muddy brown. The clothes are so saturated with filth that a single wash is almost nothing. You scrub them with the soap, bring them out, and repeat the process. The water is still filthy. You realize the truth of what the older sailors know. These clothes will never be truly clean again. The grime is not on the fabric. It's in the fabric. This is a lesser-known aspect of textile history. Natural fibers like linen and wool, when subjected to this level of prolonged soiling and decomposition, undergo a permanent change. The dirt becomes part of the material itself. The historical debate around sailors' hygiene often focuses on their lack of bathing, but it's equally about their relationship with their clothing. Did they feel the same sense of disgust that a modern person would? Or was their sensory world so different that the feeling of stiff, greasy, half-rotting clothes was simply the norm? Some evidence suggests that sailors took immense pride in a new, clean set of clothes, often called their shore-going rate, which they would guard jealously. This implies they were acutely aware of their own filth and craved the feeling of being clean, even if it was a temporary state. Their inability to maintain that cleanliness at sea was a choice, but a harsh reality imposed by their environment. You finish your washing. Your body feels cleaner, though the phantom itch of lice still lingers. Your clothes are merely dampened slightly less disgusting than before. You put them back on, the wet fabric clinging to your skin. It's an uncomfortable feeling, but it's the best you can do. As you walk back towards the ship, you feel a profound sense of temporary victory. You have, for a brief moment, pushed back against the tide of filth, but as you step back onto the gangplank and the familiar, overwhelming stench of the ship envelops you once more. The victory feels hollow. You are a single, marginally cleaner person re-entering a world of absolute, unyielding squalor. The cleanliness you feel is a fragile illusion, a fleeting memory you will carry with you back into the grime. The ship doesn't care that you've washed. The rats and lice are waiting. The foul water and rotting food are already on board. Within days, the grime will reclaim you. The thin veneer of civilization you just scrubbed onto your skin will be eroded, and you will once again be just another filthy cog in this floating machine of decay. The brief, luxurious moment of being clean only serves to highlight the profound, inescapable dirtiness of the life you are now living. The ship is ready to sail. The anchor is weighed. The sails are unfurled to catch the morning breeze, and the chaotic port towel slowly shrinks behind you. The mood on board is a strange mix of relief and melancholy. The pirates are leaving behind the pleasures and the troubles of the shore, returning to the only home they truly have. Now, the focus shifts to the most critical part of any departure, the supplies. You are put to work, helping to load the last of the provisions, the food and water that will sustain you until you can next make landfall or capture another vessel. You watch as barrels of fresh water are winched aboard and lowered into the hold. They are sealed with wooden bungs, but you know what will happen to the contents over the coming weeks. The water will stagnate. The algae will bloom. The larvae will hatch. You are essentially loading future sickness onto the ship. This is the fundamental, inescapable problem of pre-modern seafaring. There was no way to keep water fresh. The use of iron tanks instead of wooden casks would later improve the situation. But for the pirates of the Golden Age, foul water was a simple fact of life. Next comes the food. You help all aboard heavy sacks of flour and biscuits. They feel dry and solid now, but you know they are almost certainly already seeded with the eggs of weevils, just waiting for the right conditions to hatch in the dark, humid hold. You are loading future infestations. Then come the massive barrels of salted beef and pork. They are sealed and branded, but there's no way to know the quality of what's inside. Was the meat fresh when it was packed? Was the brine concentrated enough? Or did a corrupt supplier pass off old, semi-cured meat that is already beginning to turn? You are loading a gamble, a game of chance with food poisoning and botulism. A small pen on the deck is filled with a new batch of scrawny, terrified chickens and perhaps a pig. These live animals are a source of genuinely fresh food, fresh meat and eggs. They are a vital resource, a well-known feature of long sea voyages, but they are also a source of filth. Their waste will foul the deck, and they must be fed and watered from the ship's own limited supplies. They are a high maintenance and very temporary luxury. This is where a lesser-known and particularly disgusting part of the ship's ecosystem comes into play, the slush fund. You see the cook carefully collecting the greasy, fatty runoff from his cooking into a special barrel. This slush was a valuable commodity. It could be used as a base for stews, a crude lubricant for the rigging, or even as a waterproofing agent for boots and coats. On naval ships, this slush was often sold in port, and the money, the slush fund, was used for the benefit of the crew. Pirates with their more direct, economic system, would likely have just considered it part of the ship's general stores. The existence of this slush barrel is a testament to the waste-nothing philosophy, but it's also a concentrated barrel of rancid, decomposing animal fat, contributing its own unique note to the ship's olfactory symphony. The historical debate here touches on pirate logistics. How organized were they? The romantic image is of a chaotic, hand-to-mouth existence, but to operate a ship for months at a time required significant planning. A pirate quartermaster was a vital and powerful figure, responsible for managing supplies and rations. Were they skilled logisticians, carefully calculating the needs of the crew, or were they just gamblers, always sailing on the edge of starvation, relying on the next prize to save them? The evidence suggests a mixture. Some famous pirates, like Bartholomew Roberts, ran incredibly organized and disciplined fleets. Others were notoriously poor planners. The quality of the provisions loaded in port often determined the success or failure of the entire voyage. As the last barrel is stowed and the hatches are closed, a sense of finality descends. The link to the land is severed. You are now entirely dependent on what is in the belly of this ship. You look at the supplies around you, and you don't see sustenance. You see a collection of ingredients for future misery. You see barrels of dysentery, sacks of weevils, and casks of scurvy. The ship is a closed system, a time bomb of decay. The process of spoilage has already begun. The moment the fresh supplies were brought into the warm, damp, rat-infested environment of the ship, the clock started ticking. The water will go foul, the biscuits will come alive, the meat will turn rancid, and the live animals will be consumed. You are sailing into the empty ocean on a vessel that is actively rotting from the inside out, sustained by provisions that are themselves in a state of managed decay. The brief interlude of freshness from the port is over. The long, slow slide back into filth and deprivation has begun. The land is a distant memory again. The days settle back into the monotonous rhythm of the sea. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. The initial, marginal feeling of cleanliness you achieved in port has long since vanished. The grime has reclaimed you, creeping back into your clothes, your hair, and your skin, until you feel as if you've never been clean at all. But this time, you notice something new. The filth is no longer just a surface layer. It feels deeper, more permanent. You look down at your hands. They are the hands of a stranger. The palms are thick with calluses from hauling ropes, so tough that you could press a knife point against them without flinching. The skin is cracked and permanently stained a brownish gray from the tar that coats every line on the ship. But it's your fingernails that capture your attention. They are broken, chipped, and trimmed with a thick, black crescent of impacted grime. This isn't the dirt of a single day's work that can be scrubbed away. It's a layered, compressed accumulation of every filthy thing you've touched for months. It's tar, grease, fish guts, rope fiber, and particles of rot, all ground together and packed into every crevice. You try to clean them. You spend an hour scraping at them with the tip of your knife, but it's a futile effort. You can remove the surface layer, but the deep-seated stain remains, embedded in the keratin of the nail itself. It's as if the filth has been absorbed into your very being, becoming a physical part of you. This is a common, well-documented sight in descriptions of sailors from this era. The permanently blackened hands and nails that mark them as men of the sea. This deep, ingrained dirtiness extends to the rest of your body. You have a small cut on your forearm that refuses to heal properly. It's perpetually inflamed, weeping a thin fluid, because it's impossible to keep it clean. The air, your clothes, your hands, everything that touches it is contaminated. Minor injuries that would be trivial on land become chronic, festering sores at sea. Your skin itself feels different. It has a permanent, greasy film from the constant sweat, the smoky air of the berthing deck, and the simple lack of washing. You are a walking culture medium. This brings us to a fascinating and lesser-known aspect of historical hygiene, the miasma theory. For centuries, long before the germ theory of disease was understood, people believed that diseases were caused by miasma, or bad air. They thought that foul smells, emanating from swamps, rotting matter, or filthy urban areas, were the direct cause of sickness. A smell was just a symptom of decay. It was the agent of disease. While this theory was incorrect about the mechanism, it was often correct in its conclusions. Avoiding places that smelled bad often meant avoiding the sources of germs. On a pirate ship, this theory created a strange psychological paradox. The entire ship was a bubble of concentrated miasma, the stench of the bilge, the rot of the food, the filth of the crew. It was an ever-present, foul-smelling cloud, according to their own understanding of health. They were living in the very heart of what should have been a death zone. The historical debate here is how sailors and pirates reconciled this. Did they simply become fatalistic, believing they were tempting fate every day? Or did they develop their own folk theories, perhaps believing that the healthy smell of salted tar somehow counteracted the unhealthy smells of rotten filth? It's likely they simply stopped thinking about it, their senses so overwhelmed that the constant stench became an unnoticed background hum. But for a newcomer like you, the smell is a constant reminder that you are breathing in the very essence of decay. You look at the older pirates, at men who have been living this life for years. You see the filth ingrained in the lines of their faces, a permanent mask of grime. You see it in their tar-blackened hands and their rotting teeth. They don't seem to notice it. They inhabit their filth with a natural, unsubscription seas. They have been uncivilized, stripped down to a state where the concepts of clean and dirty have lost their meaning. There is only what is. You are caught between two worlds. You still remember what it feels like to be clean, and that memory makes your current state a form of torment. But you are also adapting, becoming desensitized. The line between you and the environment is blurring. The dirt is not just on you anymore. It is in you. It's under your nails, in your lungs, and in the festering sores on your skin. You are becoming a part of the ship's ecosystem of filth, a walking, breathing embodiment of the squalor that surrounds you. It's a slow, insidious transformation, and the black grime under your fingernails is its permanent, undeniable proof. The sea has become a timeless, featureless expanse. The sun rises, the sun sets, the work is hard, the food is foul, the sleep is fitful. You have become so immersed in the squalor, the routine, that you have almost forgotten what you looked like before. You have avoided any kind of reflection. Not that there are many opportunities. There are no mirrors on the ship. They are a fragile, useless luxury. Your image of yourself is just a vague memory. When calm, windless afternoon, the ship is adrift on a sea as smooth and dark as polished glass. You are leaning over the rail, staring down into the water. The surface is so still that it creates a near perfect reflection. For the first time in months, you see your own face. You stare, and the stranger stares back. A ghost. The face looking up at you from the water is gotten thin, the cheekbones sharp and prominent under a layer of leathery, sunburned skin. Your eyes, which you remember as being clear, are now bloodshot and sunken, surrounded by the dark circles of perpetual fatigue. They look older, wore-out. The youthful optimism you once had is gone, replaced by a kind of haunted, hollow watchfulness. Your hair is a long, matted tangle, stiff with grease and salt. It hangs in greasy clumps around your face, a far cry from the clean, styled hair you once knew. A patchy, scraggly beard covers your lower face. It's not a deliberate style choice. It's the result of simply not having the means or the will to shave. The razor you brought with you rusted into uselessness weeks ago. The beard is just another part of the grind, another place for lice to hide in for bits of food to get caught. But it's your mouth that is the most shocking. You force a smile, a grimace, at your reflection. Your gums are slightly swollen and have a faint purplish tinge, the early, warning sign of scurvy, making its slow return. Your teeth, which you had always taken for granted, are stained a yellowish brown from the foul water in the rum. You see a dark spot on one of your molars, the beginning of a cavity that will receive no treatment and will likely fester until the tooth either rots away or has to be pulled with a pair of pliers. This is the classic pirate smile of legend, but seeing it form on your own face is horrifying. It's the smile of decay, This moment of confrontation with one's own degraded image is a powerful, if little documented, psychological event for sailors of the era. We have letters and journals from more literate seafarers that describe the shock of seeing themselves after a long voyage. It was a physical manifestation of all the hardship they had endured. It was proof that the sea had changed them, not just in spirit, but in flesh and bone. The historical debate around pirate identity often touches on their appearance. Did they cultivate their fearsome look intentionally? Men like Blackbeard famously wove fuses into their beards and lit them during battle to create a terrifying, demonic image. This was clearly a calculated act of psychological warfare. But for the average crew member, did their degraded appearance become a source of pride, a badge of honor that showed they were tough survivors? Or was it a source of shame and alienation, a constant reminder of how far they had fallen from the norms of civilized society? It was likely a complex and contradictory mix. A pirate might be proud of a fearsome scar from battle, but deeply distressed by his rotting teeth or the sores on his skin. Their appearance was both a tool of their trade and a symptom of their suffering. You stare at the face in the water, this ghost of who you used to be. You see the nicks and scars from minor accidents on deck. You see the peeling skin on your nose from a recent sunburn. You see the weary resignation in your eyes. This is the true face of a pirate, not the dashing rogue with a twinkle in his eye, but a tired, malnourished, and slowly decomposing man. The romantic image is a lie, a comfortable fiction to hide the ugly, squalid truth. The reality is this face in the water, a portrait of survival at a terrible cost. A ripple from the ship's gentle drift disturbs the reflection, shattering the image into 1,000 distorted pieces. It's almost a relief. You pull back from the railing, the face of the ghost burned into your memory. You have seen the toll this life has taken. You are no longer the person who first boarded this ship. That person is gone, lost somewhere out on the vast, unforgiving ocean. In his place is this new creature, this survivor, this pirate, and you have the sinking feeling that you will never be able to wash the reflection of that ghost away. The voyage wears on. Days blur into a grimy, monotonous continuum. You have survived the dysentery, staved off the worst of the scurvy, and learned to live with the constant companionship of lice and rats. You have endured the foul food, the sickening water, and the back-breaking labor. You have seen men maimed by accident and butchered by crude surgery. You have looked your own degraded self in the eye. Through it all, a single, unifying idea has sustained you and the rest of the crew. The promise of treasure, the glorious, glittering prize at the end of all this suffering. One day, it finally happens. A fat, slow merchant vessel is spotted on the horizon. The chase is on. The mood on the ship transforms into a focused, predatory hum. The men move with a grim efficiency, their hunger for plunder overriding their fatigue and sickness. The battle is short and brutal. Your ship is faster and your crew, filled with desperate men with nothing to lose, is far more ferocious. The merchant ship surrenders. You and the other pirates swarm aboard the captured vessel. And there, in the captain's cabin, is the prize, a heavy wooden chest filled with gold and silver coins, jewelry, and fine silks. It's real. The treasure is real. The men let out a collective roar of triumph. They run their filthy, tar-blackened hands through the gleaming coins, their eyes wide with amazing, greedy joy. This is the moment that makes it all worthwhile. This is the payoff for all the filth, the disease, and the degradation. But as you stand there, watching them celebrate, a profound and unsettling realization dawns on you. You look at the gold, so clean and bright, and then you look at the men holding it. They are gaunt, scarred, and rotting from the inside out. Their teeth are falling out, their bodies are covered in sores, and their clothes are disintegrating on their backs. They are trading their health, their humanity, and their very lives for these inanimate objects. You finally understand the true curse of the pirate. It's not a mythical kraken or a ghostly galleon. It's not the wrath of the sea or the judgment of the king. The curse is the life itself. It's a devil's bargain. You trade a short, brutal, and disgusting existence for a few moments of fleeting wealth and freedom. You destroy your body and soul for a chest of metal you can't take with you. This is the central, grim irony of the pirate's life, a mainstream historical observation that is often lost in the romance of adventure. They sought the ultimate freedom but were utterly enslaved by their own body's decay. You think about what will happen next. The crew will sail to a pirate-friendly port. They will spend this treasure with reckless abandon, drinking it away, gambling it away, and buying a few moments of fleeting pleasure that will likely leave them with new diseases. Within a few weeks, the gold will be gone, and they will be back on this rotting ship, sick and destitute, ready to start the vile, vicious cycle all over again. The treasure is not an escape. It is merely the fuel that keeps the engine of their own destruction running. There is a lesser-known school of thought among some historians who debate the ultimate motivations of pirates. Was it really about the gold, or was the gold just an excuse? Perhaps, for some, the true treasure was the escape itself, the rejection of a society that had no place for them, the radical freedom of living outside the law, even if that freedom came at the cost of their own slow-motion suicide. The gold was just the tangible symbol, the currency of a life lived in loud, violent defiance of a world that had cast them out. It's a bait with no clear answer, a question that probes the very heart of what it meant to be a pirate. You look away from the glittering treasure chastened at your own hands. You see the calusas, the scars, the dirt packed permanently under your nails. You have paid a price for your share of this gold. You have paid with your health, your innocence, and your connection to the world you once knew. You have become a ghost, a filthy, walking dead man, just like the rest of them. The gold coins feel cold and meaningless in your hand. The real pirate treasure, you realize, was never the gold, it was life, and you have traded yours away for almost nothing. The ship will sail on, lurching from one squalid adventure to the next, a floating coffin lined with a thin layer of gold, forever cursed to repeat its cycle of filth and despair. And so, the ship sails on, a ghost on a dark ocean, forever chasing a horizon that promises relief, but only delivers more of the same. The creak of the timber becomes a lullaby. The groan of the rigging a sigh in the night. The stories of filth and hardship, of disease and despair, begin to dissolve, their sharp edges softening as you drift deeper. The faces of the pirates, once so clear and haggard in your mind's eye, now blur into indistinct shadows, their rasping voices fading into the gentle, rhythmic whisper of the waves against the hull. You are no longer on the deck. You are in your hammock, but it is not the dirty, infested swing from the berthing deck. It is soft, clean, and it cradles you with an impossible comfort. The air around you is no longer thick with the stench of rotten and washed bodies. It is cool and clean, carrying the faint, sweet scent of distant shores and forgotten gardens. The itching has stopped. The gnawing hunger is gone. The endless, aching fatigue has finally melted away, replaced by a profound and heavy sense of peace. The ship itself seems to be transforming. Its grimy, tar-caked wood fading into something ethereal and translucent. It is a vessel of memory now. Its journey complete, you feel the gentle rocking, a slow, soothing motion that pulls you down, down into the deep, quiet waters of sleep. The last vestiges of the story, the final echoes of the suffering, are washed away by the tide of your own encroaching dreams. There is no more filth, no more pain. There is only the calm, the quiet, and the gentle darkness. You are safe. You are comfortable. You are asleep.